Hi everyone, this is your favorite film critic Jay or Jaylan Salah as you formerly know her. Today I have the pleasure of interviewing British composer James Everingham to talk about composing the score for the limited series Chief of War, starring Jason Momoa, a historical drama based on true events set amidst the drop of islands of Hawaii in the late 18th century. James, so happy to have you here.
Thank you for having me.
Okay, so I want to start by asking you. I'm a poet, so the world to me is composed of words. As a musician or a music composer, what does the world speak to you? How does it speak to you? Is it through sounds, through music, in nature? I want to know.
Yeah, wow. I think, life in general, as an artist, and maybe you can sort of draw parallels in your own work, but life informs art, right? Through experiences, through things that happen to us in everyday life, through the places we visit, the people we meet. All those things, I think, feed into, what I would consider my inspiration for my music. Um, in the case of Chief of War, the people of Hawaii, the setting of the islands of Hawaii, those are all huge elements that fed into what was sort of the big picture inspiration.
Okay, so Chief of War seems like this gigantic project. How do you react when you receive a project like that? Like, do you break it down into smaller pieces? How do you tackle it? How do you work on it collaboratively, of course, with Hans Zimmer? So I want to know, like, you have Chief of War. How do you react?
Excitement, of course. Jason Momoa, in one of his most important roles to date. It's a very, very special opportunity, and that's very overwhelming because, it's a lot of music to write, right, across nine 1 hour episodes. Um, and that's something I've done before. Hans obviously has done like a lot of that, so that we're no strangers to that. I think the big daunting factor to Chief of War specifically was the Hawaiian element to it, right? And we knew that we had to get that part right and that it had to be authentic and respectful. So yeah, it's a massive responsibility that comes with the role of being the composer for Chief of War specifically. Um, and so you know, intrepidation, but also yes, excitement.
Okay, so you combined percussions, the Hawaiian nose flute, orchestration, but also vocals. And you created a sound that is really unique, but also feels very authentic. How did you work on creating all of that? And how did you collect? How did you know which to use and what to use in your score?
The credit for the vocals really has to go to Kamaka'iva Kanakaole. She was our consultant. I mean, both a sort of cultural consultant for us and for the producers during production, but also performed many of the vocals on the score. Um, and my relationship with her was so important to making sure that what we were doing was rooted in authenticity and it wasn't just my interpretation of, what Hawaiian music sounds like, right? She comes from a family that have dedicated their lives to preserving, Hawaiian cultural practices and heritage. And so she was by far the best person to work with on that. And also, you know, the most incredible performer. And so we spent a lot of time together discussing, what kind of vocals should go where, whether it should be more atmospheric or maybe more lyric led. And where it was more lyric led, that was where she really came in and wrote those lyrics, and helped us in putting together some incredible vocal groups that we recorded in Hawaii.
And how do you know when to introduce the vocals and when to stop? Because this fascinates me, the idea of composing a score.
Mhm.
When do you know when to have the just the instruments playing and then the vocal introduction, or it could be like an echo in the background. When do you know how to put and pull?
Yeah, it's a delicate balance for sure. I mean, especially when the show, at least, much of the first two episodes and the other episodes, but mostly the first two episodes are in Olelo Hawaii, the Hawaiian language. And so when we've got lyrics, that are sung also in that language, it's a challenge to place those around the dialogue without it feeling cluttered, right? So a lot of the time it comes down to discussions with the producers, with the showrunners and the editorial team who, on Chief of War were just incredible to work with. Amazing artists, in their own respective crafts that, it felt like we were all speaking the same language, literally sometimes, to kind of put together, a score that was in harmony with what was happening on screen, and didn't tread on, maybe there's a really important moment that's happening on screen, and in order to help that land, the music has to take a backseat, and sometimes the opposite.
Exactly. So what I want to know is you watch the scene and then you bring the music, or is it in the beginning like you have like a general outline of the music? When does the music start and when does your experience as just a viewer receiving the show come?
Yeah, I think it's a mixture. Like, one of the first things we'll do as a team is sit down and watch the episode and discuss where do we want to place music? Where does music need to take a back seat? And where we do have music, what do we want it to do here? Maybe there's already a piece of music that Hans or I have written that fits really well to the scene and we want to adapt that. Maybe we feel like we need something new here. For example, in the case of the Colonials, when they come on screen, we knew we needed a completely different musical sort of palette for them. And so, there's a lot of discussion, firstly as a team about where music needs to land. Um, but yeah, you also mentioned like as an audience member, right? I am an audience member the first time I watched the episode, and I, have a very visceral reaction to moments where I know that I can really go crazy with the music and moments where I know that it makes sense to, tame it back a little bit, and let what's happening on screen speak for itself.
So, James, do you enjoy the collaboration? Like you collaborated obviously with Hans a lot. Do you enjoy going solo sometimes, or do you love the collaborative work because of, like the brainstorming and the idea, the art that is synergistically created from two great minds together?
Collaboration, is where it's at for me. I'm a competent musician, but nothing compared to, the people that I have the ability to bring in and work with. Obviously, you mentioned Hans, who's had an incredible career and brings so much to the table. But also the musicians. I mean, that's something that Hans has been incredible at over his career, has been bringing in the right people to play, to sing, to perform on scores, and not even just session musicians and people that are excellent at specific instruments, but people like Pharrell Williams, for example, that can bring a completely fresh voice to a score. Um, and, for Chief of War specifically, there was no way that Hans as a German and myself as a Brit were going to be able to authentically capture the musical sort of landscape of Hawaii on our own. We knew that the collaborators that we were going to work with in Hawaii were going to be the core of the score, and they were going to lay down the heart of the music, really. And so I don't know. For me, all the times where I've got to collaborate in my career, be it with Kamaka Eva and the other incredible Hawaiians on Chief of War, and with Hans, with my co-composers Adam Lucas, for example. We worked with Aurora on Frozen Planet 2. Those opportunities have by far been the most special for me.
How do you think, or why do you think the importance is nowadays to have projects like Chief of War with authentic, like the actual people who we are talking about being part of the creative process, part of the
Mhm.
decision-making process? Why do you think there is a need or an importance for these stories nowadays in specific in this climate all around the world?
Yeah, I think I'm excited to see more of these kinds of shows. It feels like there's, more bravery recently to do more like this. And it's a massive privilege to be involved with a show like Chief of War because of how much it means to the industry and to Hawaii specifically. Um, you know, talking with the creators of the show, Pa'a, um, you know, it's not just something that can be inspirational for new talent, for young people that are getting started in the industry, and that are maybe, speaking this dying language and see this as, representation on screen. That's not only an incredibly powerful thing for new talent in the industry, but also for those that have been around a long time, that maybe grew up speaking Olelo Hawaii, to now see a show of this scale in their native tongue is a really powerful thing. Um, Talking about the music specifically, um, I'm not aware of a score, at least of this scale, that features Olelo Hawaii in the music. And so to be able to do that, to be able to provide, some kind of platform to amplify a kind of entire world of music that I think has really gone undiscovered for a long time, on a global stage, is a really, really special thing for me.
Okay, so I want to bring you back to James because you had your first feature length, like orchestra at 17, like you recorded something starting 17 years old. So music came to you naturally. You taught yourself by ear as correctly as I
Mhm.
read. And as someone, because I've been writing poetry before I learned how to speak. So I know when it's like this is something in your blood rather than something that
Mhm.
is taught to you or you went to a traditional schooling and stuff. How did that feel like? And how do you see yourself as a musician, like in the world at large?
Yeah, I mean, you're 100% right. For me, music was something that came very naturally. You know, as far back as I can remember, I was playing on a piano or hitting something in some kind of vague rhythm. Um, Growing up, there was always music playing in the house, and so I was exposed to so many different genres and a lot of the greats as well: Bach, Beethoven, Mozart, Brahms, Mahler, Rachmaninoff. These artists, incredible pioneers of music were sort of on repeat. Uh, that all sort of feeds into what I like to think of as like a big cauldron of inspiration, where everything is sort of simmers and kind of results in what is kind of wholly my sources of inspiration that shape who I am as a composer and as a musician today. Um, and yeah, I feel incredibly grateful that I was able to discover, writing music for film and TV as a viable career path, as something that I can do every day. It doesn't feel like work. It's something that comes very naturally to me and something that I'm very, very lucky to get to do.
Okay, because there are tracks that I totally loved, and I don't know if you like have memorized all the names for the tracks, but Stand with Maui, for example, the vocals
Hmm.
create the magical moments on screen where Volcano sent chills down my spine. So how can you have this emotionally charged one with vocals that kind of evoke tears in me? And at the same time, there's this kind of like a cry of war, a very intense and a little bit scary one. Like, how do you have both of those created?
Yeah, I mean, it depends on the scene, like you said. I mean, that moment in episode one where Stan with Maui plays, that was one of
Yeah.
the first things that we wrote. And it was very clear to us that that was a very important, powerful moment in the show, and for the character of Katiana as well. So yeah, you know when you need to bring that melody in full force and sort of give people the goosebumps, right? Um, Volcano, yeah, this massive, moment that is coming in episode 9. Um, you know, yeah, it's just some of the battles and the fights and chases that take place in this series are just on such a large scale. To get to look at that incredible footage and write music for that is just a whole lot of fun because it kind of the whole world is opened up, especially by that point in the series, right? It's you've got all your Hawaiian influences, of course, but then you've got colonials that are sort of coming to the islands and blending with the Hawaiians, and there's you've got guns now, and so there's a whole other musical language that we're able to incorporate into the score, and so that just opens up all the options. And by episode 9, I was having a hell of a lot of fun.
And was there a challenging moment where you got stuck, like whether with Hans or alone, like, okay, how are we going to compose this? What are we going to do about this?
It was funny. I got stuck on the very first scene. We did the very first scene of episode 1. It was one of the last things that I worked on.
Wow.
And it's funny, you sort of beat yourself up for that because it's like, how, I've written all these hours of music and now I can't figure out what needs to happen at the very first scene. How's that possible? But every artist suffers from writer's block. For me, I just have to go home, right? Like get a good night's sleep, think about it, come back the next morning and try again, and just repeat until you get it. Um, and really, actually, every time over the scoring process that one of those moments came up where we weren't quite sure what direction to go in, the inspiration that we were able to take from traditional Hawaiian music was really our sort of touchstone. We would always come back to that, listen to the kinds of rhythms, the way vocals are used, the way percussion is used, and the way melodies are constructed, and we'd use that to form, the basis of whatever we were going to write next.
Okay, but how do you create the right score, encompassing the story, but also elevating the narrative, creating, because I feel like film score and TV music score is a world within a world. Like I can take
Mhm.
some of my favorite scores and listen to them, yes, remembering the events of the film, but also creating my own world, my own inner fantasies about them. So how do you stay true and yes, focus on the core of the story, but also create a mini world within?
Oh, that's a really interesting question. Yeah, I think it's always a really gratifying moment when you write music that is inherently tied to a character or a scene or an emotion in the scene. And there were a handful of moments like that, actually more than a handful, a lot of moments across the process of scoring Chief of War where, I was able to write music that it's not necessarily the most melodic music or the most, sort of pumping, energetic music, but it maybe just captures a very subtle, very raw human emotion. Um, and so I'm not sure if this entirely answers your question, but it's I always feel like it's a job well done if I can listen to that after the fact, like you said, and sort of create a world for that music, that exists outside of the show. And then of course, if it works effectively inside the show as well, it's sort of like you're killing two birds with one stone.
100%. Okay. So when you collaborate with others, when you said you're competent, like musician and composer, how does it make you feel better or what worlds does it open inside you? Because, when as a poet, I read another poet, even if I feel like, oh, I can't write a sentence that great, but it still kind of like changes the way I see the word itself or the sentence structure. So how do they change the way you see, let's say, the music note?
Yeah, I mean, with traditional Hawaiian music, my whole problem was that I didn't know what I didn't know at the start, right? And so, part of the challenge there is like, how do I sit down at the keyboard and write music, before I've really gone down that journey of learning and understanding more about traditional Hawaiian music. And that was a challenge and something that I worked really hard on, over the course of the process of the months that we were working on Chief of War. Um, all the time that I got to spend with Kamaka'iva, with all the incredible musicians. We worked with members of the group Poe and the Forefathers. We had many incredible vocalists, both in Hawaii, on Oahu, but also here in LA, that lended their performances. And to draw some kind of like parallels between some of those performances and listen to what recordings are out there of traditional hula, for example, and just to try and understand and absorb how are the melodies constructed? For example, the minor third is really prominent in Hawaiian music, and so we incorporated that into the music a lot. The way percussion is used, we use the puniu drum. That's a huge part of hula. It's sort of a drum that's strapped to the knee. It's an animal skin over a coconut shell, and so you know, listening to that music and just trying to absorb how it's used and using that to influence how we write music was a really fun process for us to go down.
Well, James, I mean, I could talk to you all day. This is amazing. I feel like I've been transported to another realm, another world. Thank you so much for being so generous with your time and telling me all about music composition.
Thank you for having me. It's been a lot of fun.
Thank you.